Hi, everybody. Welcome. Can see people are joining. We got around about, bang on time. There we are for people to join. So everyone, I'll give another sort of 30 seconds or so to let everybody settle in. But welcome. Feel free to use the chat as you see fit as well. It'll be great to kind of get a bit of an insight into where everybody geographically is located at the minute. So feel free to stick in the chat where you are in the world. I'll kick us off. Quite boring, but London. Atlanta, amazing. Was there back end of last year, first time. Love Atlanta. Fort Lauderdale. Oh, gosh, everyone's in lovely sunny places. Germany, lovely. I was in Berlin a couple of weeks ago. Nice. Cotswolds, nice. Lovely part of the world. Welcome everybody else just joining now. We're just popping into the chat where we're based geographically. So as everybody joins, just feel free to pop in the chat where you are. And we're going to use the chat quite a lot as we go through this session today. And we'll kick off from here in the sense of some ground rules and how we're going to operate the workshop. And I guess the key thing is we want it to feel like a workshop. So we want as much interactivity with you as possible. So please do use the chat. We've got some polls coming up as well, which will run. So please take attention to submitting some answers for that. It'll give some really useful discussion points. We've got what we want to talk through, but we also want to make sure that it's as valuable for you folks as possible as well. So any questions you have, please put in the chat and we'll pick up as we go through. But there will also be some Q&A time towards the end. And so we'll make sure that we pick up on any questions that we haven't answered at that point as well. But without any further ado, let's kick off. And first, I want to say thank you and thank you for joining us today. Navigating the complex digital learning market is the topic that we're going to look at. And we're pleased to have our partners Fosway here with us as well. So Myles, who we'll do introductions with in a minute, and also Craig Hamill from Direct Line Group, who's going to talk about some of his experiences and ways of working and how this aligns to this complex digital market, digital learning market also. So I'm the Director of Strategy and Growth here at Infopro Learning. I've been here in the consultancy space for around about 16 years and have also been the ex-Volkswagen UK Learning Manager. So I've been the client side and also the consultancy side. And I think, as we all know, if you're in the learning world, the way that learning has evolved and competition has evolved in the learning world, it can be very difficult to find the right partner, the right solution, and you can be presented with a myriad of different solutions. So what we ultimately want to explore and discuss and have a conversation about over the course of this next hour is understanding some of the trends, understanding some of the data and some of the analysis that Fosway have done out there, how that applies in real life, what we're seeing from a consultancy organization perspective, what Craig is seeing from a corporate operational perspective, and then what you folks in the chat want to ask us and want to bring to the table as well as some discussion points about how you navigate this environment. Myles, I'm going to hand over to you to do an introduction from your side, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Hi, everybody. It's great to see everyone here. Thanks for the invitation to join as well, Lee. So, as said, I'm Myles Runham. I'm senior analyst with the Fosway Group. Fosway is we're a specialist analyst firm focusing on the learning and HR markets, principally in Europe. So we work to try and help corporate customers navigate the marketplace, and we work with vendors to sort of support a lot of that analysis. Probably the most notable thing that we do is the 9-grid analysis. I'm the responsible analyst for digital learning. So I've been with Fosway for just over a year now. Prior to that, I ran my own consulting practice for 7 years in digital learning technology, working with vendors and corporate learning and development leaders. And prior to that, I was the head of digital for the BBC Academy. So I guess on the corporate customer side, looking after learning technology, digital learning content and products, etc. So yeah, it's great to be here. It's some great topics of conversation that we have to get into. I'm really looking forward to hearing what people think and what questions you have on your minds as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Myles. And Craig.
Hello, everybody, and happy Thursday, I think it is today, isn't it? Gosh, this week's gone quick. So I'm Craig Hamill. I am the Digital and Innovation Lead here at Direct Line Insurance Group. So one of the leading UK insurance groups with a number of different brands that are obviously relevant to our business. So I've spent the last, it's more than 20 years now in learning and development, heading up learning and development for technology organizations, working in consultancy roles. I've also done the customer success side, working for an e-learning provider called Go1, which is also a global organization, and obviously done some work with Fosway before, which is a fantastic organization. So I'm basically here to, I get very excited and passionate to talk about all things learning, but I'm here to kind of just give that lens from my 20 years of experience, particularly specializing at the moment in digital. But if I can share any of those views and perspectives, then yeah, very happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Craig. Great to have you here, and great to have you here as well, Myles. So what we're going to kick off with is a poll. So I'm going to launch the poll now, which is based on the question, are you seeing your budget for L&D initiatives increase or decrease? So please feel free to answer that poll, and I'll explain why we're looking at this question first and foremost. So we recognize that actually when it comes to L&D, more and more L&D leaders, L&D teams are feeling the pressure of needing to prove results, needing to prove action on the back of any investment that's happening. Now, that isn't just working with external consultancies or external partners, that's also from internal L&D teams. There's often been an accusation, particularly from C-suite leaders or from corporate finance teams, to say that L&D sometimes is a little bit tone deaf to the requirements of the business. The business is saying we need to grow, we need to maintain efficiencies and cost efficiencies and productivity restrictions. But L&D is saying we want to take 20 people out for a leadership program. We want to go and invest X amount of money into this digital platform and learning platform system. And so there is an accusation that the business and the L&D team is not necessarily actually aware of the demands that are on the organization itself. So this is why we're understanding and want to understand, where is your budgets currently at when it comes to L&D initiatives? And it kind of leads us to our sort of first reflective question as well, which I'll share in a minute. So we've got 9 responses so far, and we're seeing some of the results coming through. That 78% at this point are saying that they've seen a decrease, and 22% are seeing an increase. Nice to see some increases in there as well. So 78% decrease when it comes to L&D budgets, 22% increase. Craig, from your organization, how are you seeing that overall, I guess, as a holistic viewpoint in terms of the pressure on L&D to deliver, to perform, and to provide clear clarity in terms of how that's generating revenue profit for the organizations?
Yeah, so a great poll actually to kick the conversation off with. So it'd be great to see people sharing in comments why they believe it's an increase and a decrease. I think I'm going to give it from a lens from, so I've been at DLG for 10 months, but I'm going to kind of span across obviously conversations that I've also had in my network. And I think for me, there was kind of that in between choice which was missing, which is actually what I'm kind of finding through those discussions is that if we're continuously looking at spend, making sure that we're spending the right money in the right places at the right time, that can actually maybe have that influx in terms of increase and kind of flipping that, because we're very cost conscious at the moment across many organizations in terms of how we're spending that money, how can we make certain cutbacks. But actually, if you're really linking through that spend to the bottom line and how your learning provision is actually supporting that business grow, be more profitable, then actually it's more of a focus for me at really kind of having that holistic view of where that spend is going. And not all organizations actually are responsible for that centralized budgets. There are sometimes for smaller organizations, CEOs who are also responsible for determining what that spend is. So for me, it's really looking at having connecting the dots, making sure it's linked back to that organizational and L&D strategy, and really focusing on the priorities. The priority is key for me, but continuously looking at your offering and how that is kind of perceived across the business. And if you're demonstrating real value and impact on the kind of the bottom line, and you're demonstrating that return on investment, which some L&D professionals struggle to do, then sometimes that actually, as I said, could flip it. So you could look at potentially increasing that budget if you can demonstrate back to the business the value versus the impact.
Yeah, great point. Really great point. Any thoughts from you, Myles, on any of that you're hearing from Craig?
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, generally, broadly, sort of in the research that we've done across the market over the last couple of years has seen pressure on budgets, whether it's necessarily, a flat decline or not, although we have certainly seen more of that, particularly last year than previous years in the surveys that we run. So it has been just the bald facts of the economy, particularly in Europe, have tended to, put pressure on budgets across organizations, not just learning. I think one of the things that's interesting, though, is that and I think you reflected this, Craig, in your points there, is that it's not just a question of budget pressure. It's also a greater expectation on learning and development budget holders to show what they're doing with those budgets. So whether that's making the case for investment, being clear on objectives, being able to quantify objectives, and then being able to monitor the progress towards those objectives. I think we're seeing a lot more of that in the market than we'd seen before. I think it's been a point of conversation. This is for as long as I can remember. People have been talking about the need to show return on investment, demonstrate value, etc. But it's always been, it's something that we'd hoped to do, but perhaps not necessarily been had got round to. And I think the economic pressure has really accelerated that and brought that to the fore. So, and I think that, and it's something that we're seeing on the customer side, is customers approaching the market with that very much in their minds when they're looking to solutions, and therefore on the vendor side, on the supplier side, having to think probably harder now about being a good partner in supporting and demonstrating that value as well. So, hoping, I suppose, being optimistic about it is sort of the market's maturing a bit, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think it echoes both what you're saying with what Carrie said in the chat as well, in terms of, and I'll just read it out: learning initiatives for a project need to be treated as a project in and of itself, because budget tends to get snagged for other reasons to address the host project issues, reflecting that the value of training is not appreciated as it should be. And I think that's absolutely true. If you think of wider transformation projects as an example, there'll be full teams working behind that. It will be discussed at board level as part of a standing order routine, and there'll be dashboards, trackers, and all sorts of other things kind of happening at the same time. Whereas if you're talking L&D and say rolling out a core leadership program or rolling out a new strategic leadership program, they tend to happen in conjunction with stuff that's going on in the business, and it doesn't necessarily feel like that's a contribution towards the greater growth of the business. So a really interesting point and really interesting discussion so far. And what I want to do at this point is just flash up some of the key market trends which have kind of been developed by Fosway, and you should be able to see that pop up on your screen now. And Myles, maybe you could just give us a very quick overview of some of the key points in here that really jump out based on what we've discussed so far, but also what you're seeing and hearing.
Yeah, well, I guess I suppose we've touched on those first 2 points here about the economic pressure. So we've seen the sort of slower growth on the supplier side being a factor that we hadn't seen. So I think, and it's it's kind of interesting to just to reflect on that for a moment, is that in digital learning particularly, we'd seen sort of multiple years of double-digit plus growth. It's been a high growth area, huge boost from the COVID period, and the sort of that transition to digital. So the last sort of 18 months have been a bit of a sort of a rude awakening, I think, for the market there, and I think that need to demonstrate value intensifies. And I think I just want to add on that comment. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting from an L&D leader's point of view as well, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, Craig, is that I think there's kind of maybe two levels of demonstrating the value. We've sort of seen, and also with Carrie's comments in the chat about demonstrating the value of individual initiatives and treating them, sort of in that way. But there's also this, I think, a need to demonstrate the value of learning as a service to the organization overall. What does this function contribute, as a business partner, and then how does those activities and programs support that? And I think that's another sort of push to sort of demonstrate value in perhaps in a bit more of a more of a sophisticated way. I don't know, Craig, if that do you recognize that?
Yeah, I always talk about, obviously, the push-pull dynamic has been there for years. Like that, we're still, as professionals in some organisations, still wanting people to come to us. And reality is that doesn't always happen, right? So we have to have some sort of presence within the organisation. And sometimes when you really look at value, it's about getting into the business and becoming that strategic enabler, but also doing some stuff around how you're perceived, because if you're not seen, you're not heard, essentially. So part of that value is about getting out into the business. It's about understanding some of those operational challenges and obstacles, but also understanding what the business actually wants to achieve and why they want to achieve it, so that when you have those competing priorities that are coming in, you can make some decisions. Because again, the size of your digital team or learning team will have an impact on what is actually realistic for you to design and develop. And so sometimes you're going to have to make some of those decisions, those bold decisions. But actually, if you always go back to the why, so what is it that the organization is trying to achieve, and then link that and then there's a link to your L&D strategy, then as a result of that, you can make some proper data driven decisions around what it is that you're doing. And I think with that, it means that, as L&D professionals, I think we need to become a bit more sort of commercially minded, so that if operationally we understand the why and we build those relationships, then we can really support the business and change that push-pull dynamic, so that the operation is coming and knocking on our door going, we know what value you can bring to the table, you've got a seat at the table and we need your help, and this is how we want you to do it. Whereas I think at the moment there's still that transition from being quite a tactical support mechanism, rather than sort of being that strategic enabler and front runner to the organization's success.
Yeah, really interesting points. And I think that also kind of then leads us on to something that Kamal, hope I pronounced that right, apologies if not, has asked in chat. Can you speak to the idea of how managed services perfect, and how that is growing? Read the last point on the slides. And if I jump in on that one first, really, and for us as an organization, Infopro Learning, managed learning services is where we started 30 odd years ago. And organizations kind of look for a business to go, we want to be able to get everybody, one company, to manage our outsourcing and our learning partners and our content, so that it all feels the same, it all feels like a true partnership. But obviously, and I guess it goes to what you're saying as well, Brian, on your previous comment, there's been an explosion really of suppliers on the market. I go to Learning Tech as an example every single year, and other learning L&D events, and there's always a section for new pop-ups, and it's often one of the biggest sections. ATD, the Global L&D Conference, has a whole sort of area of a huge conference hall that is purely devoted to almost pop-up type businesses, which is great. But from a client perspective, from an organizational perspective, You don't know who's good. You don't know who to look at. You don't know what's right. You don't know where the right place is to invest your money. You don't know where your data is going to be stored. You don't know what InfoSec's going to think to it, et cetera, et cetera. And it kind of generates all of these questions. And where we go with that managed learning services is I was with our client up in London a few weeks ago. And one of their biggest challenges and what they've been tasked with is they had around about 22 different vendors across the whole of this organization doing different things, from AI synthesization, AI videos, e-learning content development. LMS platform was a different provider to the people that are creating the L&D content. They had separate facilitators that would then come in and facilitate, and they'd have separate designers for e-learning and separate designers for human-led or face-to-face workshops. And when they did some analysis, they found they were spending so much money, not really needed to spend that so much money across all of these different elements. And actually, what we are seeing and what we're definitely recognizing, what organizations are telling us, is this need to go more down a managed service route, where not just necessarily working with one client to do everything, but a client from a managed learning services perspective that can also manage the vendors, manage the projects, manage the spend, manage the RFPs, etc. Because the businesses just don't have the time if they'll be able to do that, and the finance teams and procurement teams are identifying that. So they're definitely looking for more of a way to simplify that process. Craig, I don't know from your experience how that is replicated or resonated with your world.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously I've also operated in the CSM world, and it definitely is going back to being a learning practitioner has put a completely different lens on the way in which I view vendors. I think for anybody starting out in an L&D role, it can be quite overwhelming, and it can be quite complex based on obviously some of the examples that you could just give them there around the intricacies and the complexities within that business of, operating multiple different platforms, servicing, the relationships with those vendors. And so I think that again goes back to, how many organizations in terms of their L&D functions are really looking cross-functionally about how they're supporting the business and in terms of that learning provision and learning proposition. I think then when it comes to vendors, I think particularly with my CSM hat on is, if I'm working with a service provider, for me, it's all about making sure that you get that service, which is the bit that then differentiates from one supplier to the next. I don't want somebody turning up once a month and just going, how many licenses have you activated, or what can we do to support you? I want a strategic partnership whereby that vendor or that supplier feels very much ingrained within our business, so that operationally they know what our strategy looks like. Operationally, they're very close to what it is that we're doing, and again, they feel part of a wider extension of our team. And I still very much perceive this like, some CSMs today feels very much like a traditional account manager, which is about just the relationship and are you happy and are things going well, whereas I want somebody to be inside of that data, really supporting us, really understanding, the complexities of, a skills based organization and what we're trying to do from a career driven perspective. So I definitely look at it with a completely different lens now in terms of actually operating in those roles and how things have evolved actually over the years, because there is so much competition. And I always love that what you talked about actually with the learning technologies and having that space for new suppliers to the market, because sometimes it's keeping up with the Joneses and we want what that person has, but actually that's where I think things like networking and utilizing your connections to help you make those right decisions are really, really worthwhile, which is where Fosway comes into it, because Fosway really is doing a lot of that legwork for you in terms of operating in that space and trying to navigate through some of those decisions that you need to make. But yeah, I hope that answers the question, because I kind of came at it from a few different angles.
Absolutely, no, really useful. And anybody in chat, there's great discussion going on in chat as well. And anybody got any questions on that, feel free to put them in. And Christy makes a point around, why aren't more organizations training in VR? It is almost like ILT, but requires less capital, saves on travel, etc. And we'll move on to the next bit, but I feel like I've got some experience to answer that question, in the sense of, actually, virtual reality technology is evolving constantly. What we're seeing and hearing from some of our clients in particular is, until it doesn't have to be a sort of big thing on your face or on your head to be able to be immersed in that environment, it's not going to be particularly mainstream. So part of the challenge is, how do we, well, not us, because we're not techie people, but how does the technology industry kind of evolve that so that it can be more accessible? We're seeing things like Ray-Ban launching their Meta glasses. We're seeing Apple Vision, which is still a sort of Oculus type thing. But until it's a bit more accessible, like Ray-Ban, like you're just wearing a pair of sunglasses and it can interact in that way and be immersed into different environments, some of the organizations were kind of seeing it as backing away a little bit, because we still need people to interact with people in a real way, but it needs to also feel quite human, which is always a really interesting point. But picking up on the topic of this around the complexity of the digital learning market, we kind of shared on the previous slide the key trends, and what Myles and the folks at Fosway have done is then map that across different segments as well. And I think we see some interesting synergies as we kind of traverse this also, particularly where we're seeing managed learning services as an example. In the center, vendors are seeking longer term strategic relationships. And here at Infopro Learning, we make no apologies for that. We're not about making a quick buck. We're not about just doing short term projects with clients. We're there to see that improve the results, and we're also there as a trusted advisor and partner to work together on the solutions. And also, we're seeing these partnerships and reseller agreements growing in the terms of also us being a trusted advisor, but then also being able to partner with other organizations. AI, and we'll come to AI in a little while, is a prime example of that. Some of our clients have said to us, we absolutely can never use AI right now because of the lack of regulation to be able to do some of our projects, because we can't be sure where that information is going. But actually, they will quite happily share information with us through an NDA. And we build content, we build learning, we build partnerships through that. But actually, through this third-party reseller partnership agreement, we're actually able to then utilize some of the AI capabilities, such as generative AI, to be able to build some of that content, which naturally keeps the costs low, because the design and build time is lower because it's being expedited. But before the session even started, we were talking about how it still needs to be humanized at some point as well, with emotion built in. So this vendor longer term relationships, this partnerships and getting access to wider markets through people you trust and are partnered with is a crucial point. Myles, I don't know if you just want to kind of give us a summary overview, I guess, of some of the key elements that we're looking at here in terms of how those trends are mapping against some of these different segments.
Yeah, I suppose we touched on when we're thinking about the VR conversation a moment ago, and we've seen this point there. It's sort of in the middle of this interest in adaptive and immersive solutions is rising, and I think I suppose VR is one example of immersive. The broad definition of immersive, but what we're seeing is that I suppose the partly driven by AI, but also just generally the sort of ease of access of content. Generating, creating, and distributing content to learners isn't the big problem anymore. In fact, it's probably a problem that it's too easy to do. And what we're seeing is people are interested more now in adaptive experiences that personalize the learning, to a particular context and need, and adapt. So that's personalizing and recommending the right content, but it's also a designing an adaptive experience through a program that's, for me individually, responds to my behavior in the program, responds to my, kind of assessment and level of capability and behavior as I go through. So that's quite interesting. I think there's a relationship with AI there, which we'll probably come back to. I think and similarly with immersive solutions, what we're seeing is that there's a lot more desire to practice and experience, not necessarily, a completely lifelike experience, but the opportunity to practice and rehearse and get feedback, particularly with, in some of those soft skills areas, but also more technical skills, to try stuff out, see how you do, get some feedback as you develop as well. So I think there's sort of more sophistication on top of content, or extending the sophistication of learning content is a really important trend. I think that just the generative AI angle on this is that the speed and cost of creating the content that powers those solutions is dropping, which actually makes those immersive and adaptive solutions arguably more affordable over time as well, which is something that we're starting to see, but that's a trend we expect to see develop. So I think that's one of the areas that I think it's useful to focus on. I think just the risk of going through all of these and ad nauseum, and which I won't do. I think, but the one other that's really significant is skills intelligence point as well. So I think that's becoming very significant for organizations at the sort of strategic business level or organizational strategy level, of having the right skills in the workforce and developing the right skills within the workforce. A lot of that rests on the ability to identify what those skills are, using large data sets to sort of scrape job boards and LinkedIn posts, etc., to map the skills, and then various levels of assessment and validation, etc., to understand the skills profile of your employees, development plans on top of that, and those are then personalized. I think that's becoming a really, really important part of a lot of the services that we've seen evolving in the roadmaps for businesses as well. That's sort of the idea of skills is probably the most important driver, I think. Actually, it's, although AI has been the big conversation point, I think skills feels like the real engine for L&D.
Yeah, and I'd absolutely agree with that as well. I think one of the things I'm hearing is how, and it was a question at a recent event, how do we just go about developing a multi-skilled workforce? Front office, back office as a prime example, and how those two things interconnect with each other. And actually, through COVID, if we mention COVID, organizations kind of really then identified how siloed some of those skills were for certain people. And when they wanted to put other people into different jobs, they were also then surprised at how quickly people could do different types of jobs and how quickly people could actually adapt into those different types of jobs. And the workforce now, particularly in Gen Z, look for that flexibility of approach in terms of, I'm skilled not just in one particular thing, but I'm multi-skilled to be able to kind of apply across lots of different areas of an organization. And I totally agree. I think that's what's going to be important in terms of moving forwards. And kind of on that point, I'm going to throw out the next poll, which is the question around, what do we value as more important? Do you value out there lots of content, and you can get lots of content, you can purchase lots of content, or actually are you seeing more of a shift into value around personalized outcome-based content? So stick in some thoughts and results into that poll there around lots of content versus personalized outcome-based content. Craig, in your experience, what have you seen sort of the shift been like? Because I know you're very present in the learning world, things like the LPI, etc., learning events and other different types of suppliers. So you see everything really, and then also from a client side. How are you seeing those demands shift and change or fluctuate between content aggregation versus more personalized experiences?
Great question. And obviously I worked for a content aggregator, so that's an interesting one to then come into back into a practitioner role, and then being responsible for digital and working with obviously our LMS, but also working with our digital team to create content. For me, it's all about creating this environment of curiosity. So volume of content is great, but it's what you do with it, right? So are you utilizing, playlists and pathways? Are those playlists and pathways just something that you've just gone, oh, this might be good for this area of the organization, and we see whether it lands? So there's this common theme of what I've talked about previously, which is around really understanding what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then looking at where there is the demand for those skills within the organization, and then how those skills then link through to careers, because careers is, again, another important thing, because I might have identified my current and my future skill set, but then how does it, if I'm hungry for progression, or I want to be thinking about succession within my business from a talent perspective, how does that then feed into the careers element of obviously the organization? We are, based on what Myles was talking about, I absolutely truly believe in immersive, right? Because it could be that you've increased your awareness, you've identified those skills, but unless you have that safe psychological environment to actually be able to practice those without being thrown into the lion's den, you can't basically feel and sense it. And for me, emotive plays a massive part of that, in terms of, well, if I'm putting to this particular setting, how am I going to react? So for example, if our organization is very much customer driven, so if I'm dealing with a vulnerable customer as a contact agent or consultant on the phone, and all of a sudden I'm thrown out of kilter with something that I've never dealt with before, how am I going to react? Because that could have so many different consequences as a result of that. So actually being able to create this immersive environment through something that sometimes feels quite personalized, feels quite adaptive, it doesn't have to be expensive, but how do I create that sense of security, but also curiosity that sets people up for success? So for me, in terms of your question around the volume, I think, yes, definitely do I see a reliance on the personalization? Yes, I do. But if you have got that volume of content, it's how you're positioning it and how you're using it. But also the other thing is you talk then about content aggregation and platforms that are out there. We heavily rely on those algorithms, and it's then basically how accurate those are. Are you getting the right results? Because that will enable you to trust. And it's a bit like, I know you possibly coming onto the AI side of things. That's all based on trust, right? Is it still, there's still this reliance on the human intervention in terms of making sure that you feel it's accurate before you're positioning it in front of your colleagues and your employees within the organization. So again, hopefully that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully that takes into account from different lenses within the organization.
Absolutely, really useful. And I think echoing that with what we're seeing in the chat here from Kamal and from Brian as well, is it's almost a bit of a both and, but to serve the right purpose and to serve the right task. And actually, you can't just be doing these things and expect them to work and everybody go, amazing, I've now got access to 1,000 courses, this is going to change the world and I'm going to become the best seller or the best customer experience advisor. Doesn't happen like that. So there is a heavy reliance on the L&D team, on the communications team, on line managers to be able to brief those things right, but also for the team that's bringing them into the business to be able to identify what the right tool is for the right job. And I think, Brian, you make a very pertinent point around content being job role focused. And for me, that is where some of that personalization absolutely comes in, because if I work in a contact center team, as an example, working for a very particular product, doing a particular job in that contact center team, that can be very different across many different organizations. And so what you end up with in a generic sense is very general information that perhaps will land or won't land. And it kind of, what I would call, adopt some of the kitchen sink technique of let's just throw all of that stuff in and they'll find something in there that's going to deliver them value. But actually, with that time and effort, we can build something that actually is replicable to their job, that the scenarios and the instances where they come to the skills practice element feels like their job. And it's an important point for us to be able to consider, because you said at the start of your comment, Brian, around many people are very time poor. You're right. And that is where, as Craig is saying, that micro learning comes in. And I think where I want to sort of really take this next as a discussion is to think about, if these are some of the considerations around personalized versus lots of different types of content, how are we then starting to understand that in our worlds and in our roles? And what is the sort of planning resources that we're thinking about today in terms of looking ahead to tomorrow? And as part of the research with Fosway, they pulled some data together, which I'm sharing on the screen just now for you. And you can see there's quite a swing from right to left there in terms of some of the information. But you look at, as an example, external contractor marketplace. People want to use external contractor marketplaces less. They want to use this internal capability more. And I'll kind of throw this out there, but I think organizations are in this sort of flux period right now where, I'll use the C word of COVID again. I hate to use it, but everything was kind of cut back at that point and streamlined and focused down one particular route. And organizations outside of corporates helped solve that issue. And now organizations want to get back to the point where they can be an internal service and hire in some of those talents. But all of that period is going to take time, right? And it's going to take investment. But also they don't want these, as you see from this data, the full-time employees. They actually perhaps want to use less full-time employees. So a more gig type economy within the organization. So it's kind of a question out there that when people are navigating this complex digital learning market, how do you get the balance right between expertise of learning and expertise of industry, but also expertise of the organization itself? And how do we then make sure that we're doing things that achieve the right results for the business? So, Myles, I don't know if you could provide any insights in terms of some of the data backup that we're seeing there, but how do we protect that internal experience and legacy of a business whilst also recognizing the value that the market outside of that business can also bring in?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think there is, I mean, you can see it from this data as a bit of a retrenchment, sort of back to sort of bring things in house because it's kind of less resource intensive, etc. But one of the trade-offs in that is I still identifying and finding the right expertise. This is perhaps about going back to a complex market is exactly what you want from that market to find that those particular sources of expertise. I think this sort of upskilling subject matter experts and project teams to be self-sufficient, I think that's a really, really important trend. I think that the risk of that trend is you just give SMEs the tools to do their own thing, and you leave them to it. I think underneath that, to make that work, it'd be good to get your view on this, Craig, sort of as someone who has, responsible for those relationships. I think building the relationships is almost the foundation of this, to me anyway. So from sort of harking back to my experience in sort of as it within the L&D function as well, is if you need to have those strong network of relationships in the organization to make those efficiencies work. So you understand the needs, you understand capacity, you understand how well people understand learning as well, because it's all very well to say it's a specialist design requirement, but if you're not in learning, you don't really mind, you're not really bothered, you just want to get on, you just want to get on with your job. So sort of helping people understand the value they can create, helping them understand how that can work, and making sure that that their context as well feels really important. I think it's something that's really easy to underestimate, is the effort it takes to build that strong network of relationships in the organization. It feels to me like it's a foundation for almost everything else from my personal experience, but I think it's really important. No technology offers a shortcut to that, I think.
No, No, and Craig, we'll come to you in a second. And I think that also echoes what we've seen in the poll result around lots of content versus personalized. 100% of people said personalized outcomes-based content. And that's really interesting, because if organizations are looking out of the business toward external partners, how do they make sure that they are getting that personalized learning, that they are getting those personalized experiences without necessarily needing to spend lots and lots of time with, say, that vendor to help them understand their business? So I think that comes down to the quality, right, of the vendor to be able to build that relationship, understand their business, bring that experience together, and be able to present back how they are perceiving the challenges, the people, the individuals, with some of the tools and techniques that they utilize. Craig, from your perspective, and when you're thinking about projects in the year ahead, and when you're thinking about internal, external, what are some of your key considerations? And I guess for the folks taking part in this, what would you say to them they need to be looking out for when they're reaching out, if personalization is an important thing?
So what's the question there? Is the question around some of the stuff that you talked about in terms of capacity, skill set of the learning team?
What would be your top tips in terms of going out to the market to identify, say, a partner that is going to be able to personalize learning in the right way, but not take a long time to do that?
Okay, so I think that the first thing for me would be, one of the top tips would be really clear about what your need is. So sometimes you might go into a situation going, I think this is what I need, but we'll just see what they tell me. And of course, with no disrespect to any salesperson, from a vendor perspective, they'll tell you what you want to hear, right? So you really have to be really, really clear about your need. Sometimes then it's having that trust in terms of the relationship that you can build with that potential supplier is crucial. So I know that you mentioned, Lee, as part of one of the previous conversations around that long-term relationship, and I think that sometimes when you're looking at things is also not just looking at the here and now in terms of what do I want from a vendor, but also longer term, can they support me on a number of those different initiatives? Because again, there's the piece around an L&D professional needing to get out into the business to understand the operation and how that works. But also, if you're looking for that long-term strategic partner, that trusted advisor, is there an opportunity for them to be able to do that to support you as well? Because once you have that trust in place, anything can happen in terms of making that, because you want to make that magic together, right? And you don't want to be managing multiple suppliers and multiple vendors. Somebody over here is supporting us with leadership, somebody over here is supporting us with our contact center, somebody over here is supporting us with that. So I think it's really to do your research. And I think one of the things that I mentioned before is about tapping into your network, right? So whether you are a LinkedIn user or something, or you're part of another communities of practice, that's what having those relationships there is for, is just reaching out to people and saying, oh, I picked up on a post that you were using this, or when you mentioned when we were on at this event, you mentioned this, is tapping into that, because that's a really good reference point, because those people will give you hopefully a very neutral perspective on terms of what that provider can support you with, but also what the experience is that you've had. Because sometimes when you go into bed with a new vendor, it can be very shiny and new and can take time to build, design and deliver that proposition. But that can change, like in a year's time, in terms of 2 years' time, you can become that very small vendor in a very complex world where you then become quite forgotten. And so actually you need to make sure that the vendor is being held accountable, that relationship and that service offering doesn't drop over a period of time. So there's probably about 3 or 4 tips in there to kind of just be conscious about.
Really useful.
Sorry, Lee. there's one thought I was just thinking about that one of the things I think to look out for in terms of personalization is how good your data is and how ready your data is. So I think it can be risky to approach a partner in the market who says, yeah, we've got a great platform, it can personalize or adapt an experience or can recommend very personally. But if you're maybe role-based data, as we had just talking about the chat, the sort of jobs, tasks, roles, skills, that data needs to be accurate and reliable, to really be useful. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of, there's no shortcuts often to sorting that out, but that foundation of data is the answer to personalization, whichever route or whichever supplier you then work with. I think it's really important not to overlook that and sort of get trapped into a technology promise that will never deliver if you don't have that ready, or as ready as you can.
Totally agree. And I think that leads us quite nicely to thinking about the sort of next and final pillar, if you like, which is around the research done for AI. And I'm going to just open up a quick poll here around the question of, do you see AI taking a crucial role in your future L&D initiative? So please feel free to answer, excuse me, the question, do you see AI taking a crucial role in your future L&D initiatives? And I'll be honest, when I first heard about AI, I might have been defined as some grumpy old man because I was like, I'm not sure. Will it help? Will it not help? Obviously, AI has been around a lot longer, but then this was more around the advent, the sort of implementation of things like ChatGPT and OpenAI and stuff like that. And I wonder, stick in the chat actually, if you prompt on a daily basis, just put me if you prompt on a daily basis, because there are some people that I speak with that I notice prompt every single day, whatever it is. They might even just ask it for some random thing like, give me an inspirational quote to get my day going. I'm feeling a little bit down. What could I be thinking? And actually people start to think about how they prompt each day for certain things. And I haven't, to be honest, but I've tried to get into a habit of finding different things to prompt for. And, with the advantation of ChatGPT 4.0, where it starts to now work with images and you can speak to it and it starts to pull information through, people are starting to use it more. But the more I talk about it from a corporate L&D perspective, organizations are seeing it as a tool to enable their growth, a tool to enable the further effectiveness of learning within their organization. And actually 100% of you have said here that you do see AI playing a crucial role in the future of your L&D. And when we look at the screen now in terms of the information that Myles and the team discovered, we can actually see in this point at the top, AI highlights extensive efficiency savings and fresh potential. And my challenge when it comes to thinking about navigating a complex digital learning market is we're seeing lots of organizations out there that specialize within a certain element of AI and L&D, such as apps that you can use AI for coaching, as an example. That's a very specific, very niche thing. What would be the multiple use cases for that? Because why I mention that is because if we go back to the original question of L&D budgets and we're talking about managed learning services providers, if we're not careful, very quickly, we're going to end up with 10 different vendors all doing different types of AI stuff. And of course, that's going to evolve and it's going to grow. But it's just a consideration around how we don't go a bit, I guess, a phrase being a magpie and for the shiny next new thing that promises us the untold wealth and untold data, as Myles was touching on as well. Myles, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit around that AI solution potential that we're seeing on the top right-hand side, because there's some really useful use cases, I guess, there in terms of how AI can be used potentially for some of these different elements.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I suppose just, yes, I guess we've seen that a lot of the focus has initially been on, it's cheaper and easier and quicker to make stuff. That's sort of the automation efficiency opportunity, and that seems quite clear. You can create media assets, you can run through design processes, ID steps, research, translation, etc. That efficiency potential is extensive. But I think what's really interesting is what happens next. And I think we've talked about adaptive as an immersion practice as sort of two opportunities there. I think there's something about personalization which is becoming quite interesting for a lot of organizations as well. And this is really thinking, one of the ways to think about that is the opportunity to use these conversational interfaces, the sort of whether it be ChatGPT or other kind of natural language conversation as an interface on the learning experience. So this might be, you can talk to the subject matter expertise, you can get a personal experience, you can get a response to your question, you can explore that response, you can get feedback. I think there's something really interesting about that as almost like a new way of thinking about learning design. So I think there's a lot of potential there. That brings us into this theme of feedback and guidance, whether that's fully coaching or not. But I think we've seen a lot of interest and a lot of development in getting the ability to offer personal feedback at scale. It's not the full, it's not a full rich feedback, but again, it gives you guidance on that's an interesting answer to a question, or it might be a useful response, and get some steer and guidance on that. So I think those are some of the sort of key areas that we've seen quite a lot of investment in, and I think that matches some of the harder problems to solve on the customer side as well. And the idea that you can do some of those things at scale are some of the sort of interesting areas. And I think it's analysis point is really important as well, is that that the ability to use to manage large data sets from a variety of data sources together in one go can be really powerful. And so rather than just analysis of what happened, analysis of what should happen, and making sort of stronger recommendations through to kind of prescribed outcomes and recommended next steps, etc. I think there's some interesting potential there. Big risk with security and safety of data that has to be certain of before, but those are probably some of the highlights on the potential side, I think.
Perfect. And Craig, I'll come to you in a sec, but I've just popped into the chat there as we head into our final 5 minutes for anybody to put any questions into the chat that you have, and we'll look to answer them whilst we're here. If not, then we'll get round and answer them afterwards. And Craig, in kind of your experience thinking about, and I'll labour on this point around data, and I guess data interrogation and understanding the effectiveness of learning. What are your thoughts and considerations around how AI can help you make better choices in terms of understanding what that data is saying, what are people asking for, but also some of the nuance in there? How much of a focus is that for you and in your experience?
Yeah, let's face it, I think AI, whether you're skeptical of it or not, it's not going anywhere. It's transforming our businesses, and there obviously that you mentioned there may be some scarcity around, whether it's ethical, social, or tech issues. It definitely has that part to play, and I definitely feel like there's kind of like that human-centered approach, which is key for kind of really complementing our roles and also empowering our teams. I think even if I look at how I currently use it, right? So I might use Microsoft Copilot, for example, and that's really helping me with productivity, whether that's helping me with reducing the amount of admin because it's summarizing my notes of meetings that I've had, so I don't have to sit there anymore and write my notes or type my notes up, and I can be present in the moment, whether that's me prompting stuff because it's sparking my creativity or innovation, or thirdly around sort of the instructional design bit, which kind of leans into what you were just saying there around the data, right? And that could be data in terms of simply from an instructional design perspective, are we getting, are we creating the learning design and delivery outcomes of interventions that we're working on? Are we getting quicker to market in terms of doing that through the data that we're getting out of that. And even in terms of some of the design, you know, building that those data points in, is that helping us with that as well? So whether that's, you know, again, I think Myles alluded to the fact that, you know, platforms and software is changing to enable us to get to those data points a lot quicker. You know, we're using some software, for example, instructional design software that's helping us create some of those smart objectives, right, which a lot of people struggle with, or is it creating some of those media assets? So it's definitely used. So I've probably got 4 tips around this. I would probably say the first one is that we've got to come to terms with it, right, because it's not going anywhere. Secondly, I think the really important thing here is, just because a platform, solution, or piece of software has AI enabled doesn't necessarily mean that we have to use it. So it's really looking at it to say, how can it best be used, and does it have a place, and is it the right time to use it? I think thirdly, then it's the application of it, and are we using it responsibly and in the right way? And then finally, I think the bit comes down to trust. So do we solely rely on using AI and the outputs of AI, but also on the flip side of that, let's embrace it and don't be scared of it. So again, there's some tips there just to really think about AI within your organization or within your role, and responsibly using it in the right way and at the right time.
Amazing. And just to wrap up, and I think there's some great points in the chat as well from Brian around translation, and also the future evolution of things like Copilot as an example, and some great examples from Christy too around some other platforms that are adapting AI into their current existing solutions. I think in summary from our side, and we'll share the information with you post session, but it is a complex market. It is also an ever evolving market. We're all expected to do more with less. And I think one of our key elements is collaboration is fundamental. Talking to each other. What have you seen work? What have you not seen work? How do you see this working? How do you see this not working? Because a lot of people have tried lots of different things, and that information is out there. We as an organization have seen our clients try and test and learn and iterate lots of different things as well. So from our perspective, the ability to be able to explore that market, but also explore it from a sense of what is the value I want to achieve for our organization, and how do we connect this to an operational commercial mindset for our organization is also really important. And Craig has said something briefly earlier on around this point of effort versus impact. And actually the minimum effort might be some form of platform with heaps of content, but will it deliver the impact that you want? 100% of you said that personalization was important. How do you find that personalization? How do you go and explore that personalization in the market? AI will be an enabler. Organizations such as ourselves are the ability to be able to partner with a business to find somebody who can actually understand your people, understand the job roles, is also a really important point. But I want to say thank you. Thank you to Craig. Thank you to Myles for being my sparring partners for the last hour. It's been a pleasure. And thank you to everybody that joined in on the chat and everybody that attended as well. And I wish you an enjoyable rest of your Thursdays. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lee.